Hi, I'm Crystal. Today I'm going to use up some scrap paper and make cards using square punches. So I think the key is to start out by getting out your scrap paper, and I just have mine stored in bins by color. I'm a macro sorter, so the bins don't have any particular organization. Just anything less than a full sheet goes in the bin. But that does make it easy to find the scrap paper and use it up when I'm ready to do that. And I am on a quest to make several hundred thank you cards to send out at my retirement, so this is part of my continuing journey. And I started out by just punching all of the squares to get ready for this project. So all of the measurements are in the description box, and I will also have them on my blog at papercraftcrystal.com. But I punched out all my squares and got any contrasting panels if I had enough paper, went ahead and got the sentiments ready. Just makes the whole process much more enjoyable as far as I'm concerned. So if you watch Tim Holtz, he talks about this as compartmental making. I just call it being organized. But you do whatever works for you. Maybe you only want to make one of these cards. I don't know that everybody has a need for a big old stack of cards. But if you do like making cards, of course there are charity card drives that you can participate in, like Cards for Cubs or Cards for Soldiers. Both of those welcome your handmade cards. So moving on to the cards, the first cards are the group that I think of as straight up and square. And here we're just taking the square punches and putting them square on the card. So this first one is 4 squares. The second one is 9 squares with a little central image. I used a heart made out of leftover wrapping paper. And the plain paper has an extra square to give it a little bit of depth and dimension. The next variation is also a 9 square grid, but in this case the smaller squares are contrasting colors. And then the final square one is a bunch of squares put together in a puzzle piece arrangement. So those were pretty easy to make, fun to do, but I think out of this group my favorite is the 9 square grids. And of the 2 versions of that, I prefer the orange one. I like those contrasting colors, so that's the one I think I'll go back to and make again and again. The next variations are diagonals. So the first one is what I think of as ombre stacks. And so we've got stacks of pinks, reds, oranges, yellows, greens, and blues. The next is large squares on the diagonal, completely covering the front of the card. That one was easy. Next we have some smaller squares that are filling up the front of the card only part way, coming in from the top, with variations in tone and pattern. Next we have ombre rose, lightest to darkest. Then we have squares covering part of the front coming in from the left, mix of colors and patterns. And then we have half and half. Now I went ahead and did 2 of these, one with the darker color on the left, one with the darker color on the right. It was easier than working out the math to just make a whole card front and then cut it in half. So I would say out of this group, this one was way too much work. I don't think I will ever do that again. But the rest of them were pretty easy and straightforward, and I think my favorite out of the group is the ombre rose. I really like how that looks. I thought that was easy to do. So that's the one I'm going to come back to, I think. The half and half was pretty good. I do have some tips for that one at the end. The final version is the round the corner, and in this stack we're going to round the 2 opposite corners of the square to make this leaf shape. So here we have one with a blank spot for the sentiment. The next one is a stack of rounded corners with some plain paper and some printed paper. Then we've got one with just plain paper but a circle in the middle to make this more explicitly a flower. Then we have one with a range of colors and not quite symmetrical shapes. I thought that was very pop art looking. So these were super easy. I liked that one. I like the flower versions. I liked the pop art version. But I think out of all of the different variations of square punch cards, these 2 were my absolute favorite. They were easy to do. I thought the visuals were very appealing. It is a little hard to round the corners on that tiny piece, but I have a tip for that as well. So I enjoyed making these square punch cards. I hope you'll give some of them a try. For the corner rounding, if you have a piece that's difficult to get into your corner rounder, it becomes much easier if you make a little bit of a handle with a piece of scrap paper and some washi tape. So even the very smallest square punches are pretty easy to corner round this way if you make yourself a handle. So the washi tape, of course, peels right off the cardstock, and it just really simplifies this process so much. No danger of punching your finger. You don't lose track of the piece of paper. It doesn't get lost in the punch, no matter what kind of corner rounder you have. Now for the diagonal squares, of course, the problem is a little bit different. And for the diagonal squares, the issue is that the piece of paper is so small that whatever you're using to hold the paper in place has trouble holding on to that small piece of paper. But if you tape the piece of paper down using washi tape to your cutter, then you're not going to knock the paper askew with your blade. So it makes it very easy to get a clean diagonal cut to make that half and half card. Now if you have got a guillotine trimmer, then if you tape the card down with the point against the edge of the cardstock, it makes it easy to use a guillotine trimmer. But I hope you'll use one of these designs to turn your scraps into a pile of even smaller scraps. Thanks for joining me today.